Hello there. Welcome back to the American Experiment podcast. My name is Grace Keating. I'm here with Kathryn Hinderacher.
Hello, Grace Keating.
Kicking off episode 42.
Guys, Grace Keating, everyone should know, is like a new addition. R.I.P. Grace Bureau. She's been married for how long now?
Month and a half.
And how's married life?
It's wonderful. I just came back from the DMV 45 minutes ago, changed my name.
Oh,
officially.
congrats.
Yes. I've got my new social security card, driver's license. It's been a pain. And
Were
it's
there
almost
any
done.
illegal immigrants in there with you?
Not that I saw. The Social Security Administration office was sketchy. That was not a place I want to go back to. Just the clientele outside. And it's in like downtown Minneapolis, and it was just terrible. But I was in and out in like 5 minutes. So.
Oh, good.
It could have been worse. All
Kind
of it
of a
could have
win
been
for
worse.
the DMV. All right, well, thanks,
So
Grace
just
Keating.
a little preview of what's going to happen to you in a year.
Oh, God.
Anyway, we have a wonderful episode for you guys today. We're going to go over some news stories from the last week or so, some fun headlines, and then we're going to kick it over to an interview. We have some brand new polling from Thinking Minnesota, American Experiment's quarterly magazine, on Minnesota's election integrity issues. So stay tuned for that.
Very timely.
Very, very timely. Mm-hmm. What are we, a month? Less than a month. 28
I think like
days?
officially less than a month. Yeah.
Yeah, from election 2024.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
I'm stressed.
Frightening times.
I'm stressed. I'm still working on, like, I think I talked about this last week, kind of like increasing how many other outside hobbies I have outside of politics and checking Twitter. So, like, sports. I have a sports update.
Oh my
if you
gosh,
want.
please.
Okay, Vikings. Win. They
Wow.
were in London. They seem to be in London a lot, which doesn't make sense to me. But anyway, they won. They were in London. Timberwolves win, and they played against LeBron James's son.
Is he good? Or is it kind of like a nepotism thing?
I think it's both. I think he's good, but I think it's also nepotism.
Interesting.
So, but that was preseason. So
it doesn't matter?
I don't know if it matters, and I don't know if any of the good people actually play. But we won.
Good for us.
Okay, I think there's another sport
Go
too
Minnesota.
that we won.
Gophers.
Gophers! Gophers won.
Thank you,
and
Isaac.
Word on the street is they're not actually great this year, but they did win. And I think people stormed the field, which is pretty cool. Or maybe not cool. I don't know if you're supposed to do that.
Is that illegal?
I don't know.
I
don't know.
have a big idea
It
that
looked
that's
cool.
like not something you're supposed to do. But it did look very cool. That's maybe the
So
only
that's
sports thing I
that's
saw.
the sports update for me.
If anyone can tell me why the Vikings were in London.
Yeah, at 8 a.m. I was
Please
like,
let me know.
I'm not waking up for that. My new hobby doesn't go that far.
Who
but,
are they playing? They can't be playing another American
the Jets.
team.
No, yes.
Why? Okay. We don't even have time
But in
for
London,
this.
I think it's like a money-making scheme. No, seriously, I think they want people in other countries to buy jerseys. Isaac's like offing himself behind the camera right now, by the way. He's like, this is horrible
We're the two most
content.
unqualified people to possibly talk about this.
Yeah, but anyway, they won, I hear. So the Vikings, 5-0. I also heard a fun stat, though, which is that the only team, oh God, you guys, I'm going to get this wrong, too, but that the only team in the past who's been 5-0 and not made it to the playoffs is the Vikings. Is that
Shocker.
true? Can you confirm? Okay, I think that's true.
We'll get our
So we
research
could
team
still
on
blow
that.
it, is what I'm told. But we'll see. Anyway, Grace,
I'm
you want to talk
surprised
about
that no
something
one-
that we know maybe a little bit more about? Maybe. Yes.
Our first American Experiment headline of the week comes from Kathryn Wigfall. What is math and reading proficiency at Minnesota's award-winning school? So they just announced the 7 Minnesota schools that won the National Blue Ribbon Award for 2024. These are schools that are, quote, exemplary, high-performing schools that either means overall academic performance or they're doing really well at closing their achievement gaps. So all good things. However, the reading and math proficiency at each of these schools is, I would say, not what you would expect from Minnesota's best, is a nice way of putting it.
Okay, so give us, what was Minnesota's top performing school? Let's go right into it.
In terms of reading and math proficiency,
And
the
what
best,
grades are these? Also say that.
Yes, so the best was Franklin Elementary School in the Mankato School District. Reading proficiency was 72%, math was 82%, which is good considering that statewide those numbers are about 50%. And yet, from a blue ribbon school in Minnesota, I was expecting closer to 100 proficiency, 100%. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
What grade is it that they test? Is it like second grade?
Well, it's just elementary. So, I
Okay.
assume...
I don't don't know. It's just like difficult. You definitely need a marker. And I guess if the average is 50%, 72% is great. But why are on average Minnesota students, only half of Minnesota students, reading at grade level? I guess that's the question I have when how much money we spend on our schools. What else is it going to? You know, besides our students being able to read, our students being able to write, I think our schools have put themselves in a position where they're spending money on all sorts of other things. I don't want more from my schools. Like, I want my kid learning to read, learning to do a little bit of math.
Yep.
Yeah, at grade level, at least.
Yep.
So, yeah, definitely interesting. I think there's such this myth in Minnesota, too, that we have, like, the best schools ever. People still say this on our side, too. All the time you hear, well, Minnesota has just the greatest schools, the greatest public schools. We do have good schools in some senses, but I mean, they're really a lot of times underperforming the national averages, which people don't expect. And it is disappointing to see people have this kind of ignorance around the issue when our students deserve much better. They deserve instruction that's focused on skills that they actually need, not skills that are, you know, secondary to things like reading and writing and learning math.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's so frustrating to see, you know, this, I think, very substandard performance. State average, 50% reading, 50% math. That's insane. That is unequivocally substandard. And yet they're still asking for more money. Our schools are so well funded. I don't know where the money's going. I always hear that it's going to, I suppose, admin salaries have been on the rise, even while enrollment's staying the same. But it's just sad. And then there's that idea you hear all the time of like, okay, well, other schools might be bad, but like my child's school is great.
Yeah.
My child's principal is great. Just like people say that with, you know, their congressmen.
Yeah, and same with like their police officers. Like people, that was another thing we've done polling on. People think like, well, you know, I hate the police, but actually my police officers in my neighborhood are pretty good. But you have to take a little bit more time and look into these things on a statewide level, on also a local level. There are a lot of ways that we can improve as Minnesotans, and by being ignorant about this issue and just, you know, thinking that the same now is the same that was true 50 years ago, that Minnesota schools are really great and really wonderful. It's not the case. So dial in, look at what's going on in your local school district. Look and see if there are school board elections coming up too. There's a great resource, Minnesota Parents Alliance. We talk about it all the time. If you don't know who to vote for in this cycle, check out there. I mean, it's really important we stay involved on schools at a local level. That's really the only way I think that these things get better. Like, tell your school boards, tell your teachers, we care about reading.
Yeah.
Like, let's prioritize this.
Yeah, there has to be accountability, and that comes from education.
Yeah, exactly.
And information. Our second headline of the week comes from David Zimmer, Illegal Immigration, a Disaster by the Numbers. Everyone kind of knows that the southern border, is a big issue this campaign season. But what are the numbers going on down there? According to the federal government's own data, there have been nearly 11 million illegal border crossings between 2021 and 2024. To compare, there were just over 3 million illegal crossings from 2017 to 2020. That's an insane difference.
Yeah, that's
an
crazy.
8 million person difference. Not only that, they estimate that the current illegal immigrant population in the U.S. is just under 17 million, costing taxpayers an estimated $150 billion annually. That is insane. Think about the last time you paid taxes. You're helping to fund this. It's infuriating.
Crazy. And I mean, especially with everything that's come out recently with FEMA and the response to Hurricane Helene and everything that's going on, it's just so upsetting. I think if this doesn't change your mind about putting our Americans first, about being able to be there for the people in our country first and foremost, like, we can't let anyone else in until we can take care of the people that are already here. The first thing we need to do is shut down the border. We can't keep having this influx of people because we can't take care of the people that are already here. And I think that's what's so sad, is everyone wants to bring in more people and bring in, you know, it comes out of kindness and well-wishing for other people in the world, which is completely, you know, fair, but we have to be able to take care of the people in this country first before we can continue to open it up to more people coming in. And currently we can't. If you're only getting $750 to go towards your entire house being destroyed in a hurricane, oh my gosh, like, what in the world? We need to be able to take care of our people first. If natural disaster hits them, if something else hurts them in this country, that should be the priority. And once we get those things in order, then we can continue taking people in. But the fact that we have no shutdown on the border is crazy. It's unfathomable, honestly. And I don't get it. I don't get, like, how people on the left continue to advocate for these policies. I mean, what's your reasoning besides you want low-wage workers, you want more voters for maybe your preferred party, or you want internal destruction of the country? I mean, really, what is I would love to see someone articulate why they're not taking action on the border, because Walz isn't doing it in debate. Kamala isn't doing it in debate. They cannot articulate why they're letting this happen. And so it leads people like me, people like maybe you, like people listening to think it's something seriously nefarious. Because why would you not take a stand for the people who already live here in America? And once we get that under control, then we'll go back to letting in more people. But we need to put a stop to this. The hurricane showed everyone in the country, we do not have things under control. We cannot afford to bring in more people and take care of them as we should be able to.
What do you make of the pivoting that has happened this campaign season with Kamala saying, I was never in charge of the border. What is happening there? I also think, and it's so telling too, that it took them this long to even acknowledge that there is a problem at the southern border. For years, it was just, it's all under control. And then, of course, right before the election, I think enough people were making a big deal about it that they had to come out and say, it's a problem, but it wasn't anything I was connected to.
Exactly. It is really interesting because I think for so long they didn't have a good response to those questions. I obviously am expressing I still think they don't have a good response to those questions. But now she's trying to backtrack, it seems like, and say, like I heard in the last debate, I think I've heard both Kamala and Walz express this, that, there was a border bill. There was a nonpartisan or a bipartisan border bill. Well, that's kind of with zero context. It was this border bill that wouldn't have done much and then was also tied to massive Ukraine funding. And so Republicans said, no, give us a straight border bill that's harsher. We're not going to tie it to these huge increases in Ukraine funding that you want. So it got defeated. So when you hear that, though, without the context, I think it's interesting that that's the perception they want to put forward, that they were working on the border, that they were tough on the border, and they're going to be. But we know by their actions that they're not. They haven't been, and it doesn't seem like they're going to be. Look at these numbers. I mean, that increase from 3 million between 2017 and 2020 to 11 million in 2021 to 2024, that's massive.
It blows your mind.
Yeah, it's crazy. So you're not doing anything about it. You're actively making it worse. Why should we believe you? I think that's my question.
Yeah, exactly. Well, if you want to read either of those stories in their entirety, of course, go to AmericanExperiment.org. New stories posted every day. Kathryn, I am not super plugged in online. Please catch me up on what's been going on in the last week.
Okay, so where do I start? Let's go with the national stories. 2 people running for president, right? So one of them did a rally. President Trump went back to Butler, Pennsylvania. He did a rally where he was previously the victim of an attempted assassination.
He went back there?
He went back there. And okay, you guys, he started his entire speech by going, as I was saying, and he turns and he points to the same slide he was on. It's incredible. So, no. I mean, everyone had fight, fight, fight signs in the audience. Elon Musk came out and he spoke briefly. It was super interesting, but I also thought it was a huge contrast to what the other candidate chose to do, which is Kamala went on a podcast called Call Her Daddy. Have you heard of that?
Ew, no. No.
Of course, Grace hasn't heard of Call Her Daddy. That is such a good sign.
What is it, please?
Okay, so it's a podcast by a woman. Her name's Alex Cooper. She's kind of like an influencer type. She got her start actually at Barstool Sports, and they kind of gave her a platform, her and this other girl, to talk about issues affecting young women, I guess you could say. I mean, it's sex related. It's sex centered. It is about talking about experiences with sex and men, and it's
doesn't sound political is my first
it's
reaction.
Not political.
Okay.
No, that's true.
Okay.
It's never been political, but she clearly got the opportunity to have on Kamala, and she took it. And she did say that she reached out to Trump's people, and either he hasn't responded or declined. It's not clear.
That's okay.
You can imagine why. I'm not sure he's going to go on this sex positive girl boss kind of podcast, but it was definitely interesting. I mean, I think the point that stuck out to me from that podcast, I'm not going to listen to the whole thing, but I saw some clips.
Well, you saw some. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And they talk a lot about, of course, reproductive rights. And they say, Alex Cooper, the interviewer, says have we ever seen men's bodies regulated the way that we're seeing women's bodies regulated right now? And Kamala says no, of course not. And they both agreed no. No. And the first thing I saw on Twitter, of course, a great point. Like, have you heard of the draft? Have you heard about the men that our country has sent to war to fight for our country and sent them to death? Of course, bodies have been regulated. You know, if you want to talk in
Whatever
this
that
like,
means.
way, whatever this means. So I don't know. It's just it was very. It was an easy interview for her. It was the people that, you know, she probably already had. And it was very, like, kind of girl boss feministy in that way. And then I liked the contrast with Trump, honestly, being up there with Elon Musk. It was, like, very... Elon was wearing an Occupy Mars shirt. It was, like, so boy energy contrasted with the very girl boss, call her daddy. It was interesting. I just had, like, so many questions about the ways that men and women are kind of differing politically lately and how we bridge that divide. I don't know.
Occupy Mars. I'm fixating on that a little bit. What an odd thing to wear. That's
Have you seen that before? He wants to like take over Mars. No, I can't talk about it. I don't like space.
Okay.
I think this this is a male-female divided issue, I'm telling you. Space, okay? I don't like space. How do you feel about talking about space? Do you think about space? Like, how often are you thinking about, like, galaxies and stuff?
I don't think space has ever, like, popped into my head unprompted. Like, I remember a few years ago when people were going to storm Area 51, which was hilarious. But, like, that was maybe the last time that and that's not even space. That's aliens. So I don't think I think about it ever.
Okay, so my gathering is that men are always thinking about this. Like, men are thinking about space. My fiance will be like, oh, do you ever just think about, like, how there could be people living? He'll, like, gaze into the sky and be like, there could be people living on those stars out there. What if we're just one small planet in the scheme? I'm like, no, shut up.
Very philosophical.
I'm like, that's not how I think. I don't want to think about it. That's weird. And if Elon wants to go occupy Mars, like, fine, I don't want any part of it. I'm not going to Mars.
Oh my gosh, I love the language of occupy, as though
Occupy
it's
Mars,
like owned by someone else.
I think it's
already?
empty, right?
Of course it is.
Okay, so I refuse to learn about space, so I don't know, like, what the rules are.
I'm not aware of anyone living up there. I know there's no American flag there yet.
Okay.
Oh my gosh, is there? This shows.
I don't know if there's one on the moon either. Do you think we went to the moon, Grace?
Yes.
Oh.
Do you not? Oh my gosh.
Oh, I don't know.
We're really going into
questions.
some dangerous waters now. Oh my gosh. What?
Okay, all I'm saying is if you see the footage.
Is this the thing about the flag flying when there's no wind? Because I have wondered about that.
There are a lot of conspiracies. Well, I think there's no wind on the moon.
That's my thought. So, like, how is the flag standing upright? I believe we went to the moon, like, for the record. I'm not questioning that. But
Don't demonetize us.
The only conspiracy theory I've ever heard that made me stop and think is, like, in every photo, the American flag is, like, sticking out, you know, perpendicular to the pole.
Okay,
How?
I just don't understand how we got back. Like, if you see, like, we're launching off the Earth in this huge hubbubaloo, it's like,
that's interesting.
I ran my hand into the thing. It's like, and then, you know, they just kind of come back. Like,
You know
don't they
what
need
it
a
is?
launch pad?
It has to be because we're, like, breaking away from Earth's gravity. That has to be, like, the atmosphere or something, right? Maybe it's, like, easier to leave the moon.
I don't know. Drop a note in the comments if
Let us know.
if we've got any.
Let us know if you think about space. Let us know if you think about space more than, I don't know, once a year.
Yeah, is it like a male-female divide? I kind of think it is. Like, I don't think about space. I don't like thinking about it. It makes me feel, it's like too philosophical.
Yeah.
Philosophical. I don't like it. But then also, I mean, I don't know. I just circling around back to where we started with this Call Her Daddy podcast, because I think it's important to point out one last thing. The abortion issue is obviously a huge issue for people this election, so people say, so people think. But this just shows, I think, how far Democrats have come, because this is a podcast that the entire premise of the podcast is racking up your body count, you know, free, like, do whatever you want with your sex life, you know, whatever. I'll make no comment on that. But the reason that this person is advocating for abortion rights is because she knows she wants to sleep with a lot of people and not have to deal with the consequences. Kamala is going on that podcast to appeal to those people. So this is not safe, legal, rare. This is not, you know, something that is Bill Clinton's Democratic Party. Like, abortion is it's necessary for public policy in some cases, but it's not good. No, this is people who have a particular reason for caring about abortion, and it's that they want to be able to live life without the consequences of their actions. And that's an extremely harmful message for women, especially young girls who listen to this podcast. If you care about this issue, like I am a little bit passionate about it, go back and listen to some of the things that they have talked about on this podcast. Don't listen to it around your kids or anyone else. It's gross.
X-rated, I assume?
Yeah, it's very X-rated,
Gross.
very explicit, and it's super harmful for young women. And if you look at the person who wants to be the first female president of the United States, for her to embrace this kind of idea that, you know, your actions should have no consequences. You should sleep around with no care in the world, no care for yourself and your dignity and the hurt it might and probably will bring you. I hate that. I really hate that. And I think that this was seriously indicative of how far the Democrats have come when it comes to issues like abortion.
On that very sad note, is there anything else from the last week that I should know about?
No, maybe Moodang, but he's kind of like out.
So it's a guy.
Oh my God.
I always
It
thought
might
it
be
was a
I
girl.
don't know. It's a hippo. He's so cute.
Is
He's
that
like-
it? Is that the
It's just a
entire,
baby
like,
hippo, yeah.
that's it?
I think
I saw
he's
something about
in-
makeup trends related to the hippo, which doesn't really make sense. Okay,
What?
so you haven't even heard of this.
No.
That's all I have.
Okay, just Google Moodang. He's like a little hippo boy. He's so cute. And he's in the news as well. So I would also catch up on that.
Thanks.
And that's really it, I think. We'll be back next week with more great, insightful news to report for y'all.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Enjoy the interview. I am back with Bill Walsh here for part 2 of our podcast. Bill Walsh is our communications director here at American Experiment and also our expert on all things polling. Would you say that's fair, Bill?
I would.
And the first question I have for you, Bill, I mean, we do these polls, let's see, what, quarterly?
Quarterly.
Now in our Thinking Minnesota, and I am probably the number one skeptic of
Poll skeptic.
the poll concept.
Of the industry? You're
The
a skeptic
whole
of the industry.
Yes, the entire poll thing. So like you say in every article kind of how we survey people, right? So it's 500 registered voters was this poll across Minnesota. Interviewed, and they use a mix of cell phone, text to web, and landline phones. Why should I trust that this sample of 500 registered voters is at all accurate, and we should believe that this polling has any merit?
Because it's science. Don't you trust the science? Haven't you heard that? Trust the science.
Okay, I was
all right.
a
Seriously.
political science major, and they
Okay.
tried to convince me of this many
All right.
times. I'm still a skeptic.
Did you take
so
stats?
do better.
Did you take statistics?
Yeah, it was at
You did.
7:30 a.m. Unfortunately,
it's a
so
hard,
I kind of took
it's a hard
it.
subject. So statistics is one of the sciences in play here. Okay, good question. And I would say this: there's two kind of polls when we talk about polling, especially in the political world. Candidate polls head to head. I'm highly skeptical of candidate polls head to head, and don't put a ton of stock in those. Those are much harder to gauge, and the reason is you're trying to predict a behavior that's going to happen kind of on one day, election day, although in Minnesota we have a 46-day election window, which we'll get to in our poll. So you're trying to predict what someone's going to do. If you do a poll in September, you're trying to predict what they're going to do on November 5th. Very difficult to do. People change their minds. People lie. It's just it's very difficult to
Guilty.
gauge. Yeah. You're the reason polling doesn't work.
Who amongst us hasn't lied to a pollster?
Yeah,
Too?
so you
That's
say you're
my
like
second part of the
you're
skepticism.
like a 21-year-old guy who lives
No,
in rural Minnesota, and then
exactly.
you say you're liberal and all these things.
Yeah, I usually say like I'm a Democrat who's voting for Trump or something like that,
Yeah.
and I list 7 or 8 ethnicities along with. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, not many people are like you. You're weird. I hope.
This stresses Bill out.
So polling for candidates, trying to gauge candidates, a one-day look. So on September 20th, if that's when you're in the field doing your poll, that's which candidate's ahead. It's, I guess, valuable, somewhat reliable, but not nearly as reliable as what we do, which is issues polling. So we rarely test people. We do it once in a while. We'll test the popularity, or we'll test the like on a Governor Walsh. Do you like the job he's doing? We like just job performance. It's not like you're going to vote for him or you like him or you want him for dinner. Just how's he doing as a governor? But we do issues. So we'll ask in this poll, it's all about election integrity issues. So do you think photo ID should be the law of the land? And on that, I think the integrity of the poll is way better. People don't tend to lie or make things up, or they're not embarrassed to tell their opinion for the most part. Certain candidates, they hold back. They want to think what the right answer is. There's some of those biases in here for sure. Especially we ask questions like, are you going to vote in the next election? Well, just about everybody says yes.
Yeah.
Now we know not everybody votes in the election, so there's a lot of liars right away in that poll. But they think that's the socially acceptable answer.
Right.
Is, well, of course I'm going to vote. Everybody votes. It's your duty to vote, and I want to be seen as someone who votes. So I'm not going to tell a stranger on the phone that I don't take it or leave it. I don't think I'll vote this year. So very few people answer that. But mostly these numbers are good, and we can rely on them as it relates to issues.
I think that's a good answer. That's a pretty good answer.
Nice.
B+.
All right, B+.
Let's dive right in, I think, and go through some of the things we asked on the poll. Here we have figure one. We can throw it up on the screen if you're watching on YouTube,
fancy.
maybe. Do we have that ability? I think so. This is kind of the main headline of this article, I would say, right? So nearly 1 in 4 Minnesotans say they are not confident in the integrity of Minnesota elections. Nationally, that jumps to almost 1 in 3. So, Bill, if you would talk a little bit about those results and then tell us why it matters. I think that's my main question. Why does integrity matter and how people perceive our elections?
Well, right. I mean, you have to have faith in the integrity of an election in order to believe the outcome. I mean, this is the essence of the January 6th and the big lie and everything else. And so it's important in a democracy for people to trust the process. And Minnesotans, they all don't right now. And that's a problem. That's a problem for the Secretary of State, Steve Simon. I mean, he might say, 23%. Well, that's a low number. Yeah, I guess, relatively low if you were looking at it one way. But another way to look at it is like, why does almost 1/4 of the Minnesotans not feel good about the integrity of our elections? That number should be 0. That number should be very close to 0. If Minnesota's elections are awesome and like Steve Simon says they are and fair and there's no problems, that number should be really close to 0, and 23 is too high. And on the federal level, you're seeing some of that. When you watch the 2020 election, especially the last presidential election, you see very close elections in swing states, and the whole ball of wax is decided by a few thousand votes in a few swing states. And then you see things going on TV as you're watching election night. So the questioning the integrity of elections nationally is a little higher than it is in Minnesota. That's also kind of a Minnesota thing. I think you'll see that throughout this poll. We certainly see it in all of our polling. We're homers. We're doing better than everybody else, and we believe that.
Our schools are great.
A lot of ways we are, but we definitely are homers. I think more than other states in terms of. So we think Minnesota elections, pretty good integrity wise. 23% don't think so, but goes up on the national level.
And I think you get into some of this in the rest of the poll, but what are some of the causes of that lack of confidence in the integrity of our elections?
Well, I mean, it actually gets to the next question because we asked it a different way, and we asked not just integrity, but we asked fraud. Mm-hmm. We asked, do you think there's fraud in the election system? And that was even a higher number of Minnesotans believe there's fraud in the election. We kind of framed a different way. And so, it's a lot of things. I mean, I think it's, you go back to 2020 again. In Minnesota specifically, the legislature we had COVID hitting us in March of 2020. The legislature was in session until May. Matter of fact, they came back every month because we were in, the governor had emergency powers that had to be extended every month. The legislature had complete control of election law. If they wanted to make changes because of the situation, the pandemic, they could have. They did make some small changes. But then after the session ended, the main session ended in May, some folks sued the Secretary of State over some elections. Hey, it's COVID. We got to relax the signature requirement on absentee ballots. Mm-hmm. When you do an absentee ballot, you have to have someone sign it, a witness sign it.
Yeah.
Well, we can't have two people sitting next to each other looking at a ballot. One of them might give the other one COVID. So we can't have that in this pandemic emergency. Can't have that. And then, COVID's going to be hard.
Did you just sign that you were also like triple masked or something? Third signature. I had 3 masks on.
I like that. Take a Polaroid of your mask and then
Staple.
send it in. Yes. The other thing in COVID, it's like, everyone's going to vote absentee, which they did. Many people voted absentee in the COVID year, which our law was already set up for. But they're all going to be coming in the mail, and people aren't used to it. So we better extend our voting period past the election day for 7 days and let them trickle in for a week after the election. That was a lawsuit. They sued Steve Simon. I'm telling you a long story here, but this is why people have skepticism, I think, in the system and not a lot of trust. And then Simon agreed with them, even though he should have defended Minnesota's election law. He agreed with them, so he went to the judge with the plaintiffs, friendly plaintiffs, and they just cut a deal and said, "Yeah, all right, the judge approved it. We've come to a settlement agreement where I agree with them. Then let's do it. Let's do what they want." So the witness signature was gone, and the 1 week period was extended for ballots trickling in. Thankfully, by the end of the fall, October 26th, kind of late. A lawsuit was won in federal court that says, no, Steve Simon, you can't make election law. The legislature could have done it. They chose not to. You can't go into court and get that done. The court shouldn't have done it. You shouldn't have done it. These lawsuits shouldn't have been thrown out. But they only did the one piece. They ended the whole week-long trickle in for ballots. They kept the witness one, though. So that's some of the things that happened, I think, in 2020. Then you watch the national scene. And I just think, you've got to understand, if you lose an election, if your candidate loses, and it's so close in so many swing states, that's really the driving cost or current of the big lie, or somebody didn't win. So nothing anybody can do about that. It was a close election.
Yeah. Okay. There's a couple things I'd love to dig into there. I mean, what you said about Steve Simon, I think, is fascinating. So he took a different route, basically, is what you're saying, than is traditional. He took more power, perhaps some would say, than is traditional by going with these plaintiffs to the court. Typically, that would stay in the legislature.
Right.
And those, new things that were passed in COVID 2020, those were in place for the 2020 election. What about the 2022 election?
Good question. They were not. It was just a one-time deal.
Okay.
So that dropped in 2022. I think there's less stress about the 2022 election. It wasn't a presidential election. Yeah. And then now we're back to 2024. Those are gone. It's back to current law. You have to have a witness signature, sign your ballot if you vote absentee, and that 7-day period didn't survive, and it certainly isn't in place now.
Okay, so going on to figure 3 here in the Thinking Minnesota poll, Minnesotans place more confidence in casting votes from the polling booth compared to mail-in ballots. Obviously, like you said, this was a huge issue in 2020. I don't know, what did you find out here from this question?
I mean, we asked, do you how much do you trust the outcome, that your vote's going to be counted if you vote in person? I think it was 79%. I got to get my numbers right? But then it drops 15 points for the mail ballot portion of it. So if you vote by mail, there's only 65% believe that your vote's going to count if you vote by mail. So a big drop off between voting in person and voting by mail. I think this to be expected. It didn't surprise us. But overall support for both systems. But the difference is very interesting. That most Minnesotans... and this is across all, when you get a 79% number, that's across all three parties, Democrat, Republican, Independent.
And can you clarify something for us? Because I think this is a point of misconception for me and other Minnesotans. Some states automatically mail you a ballot, right? Do we do that in Minnesota, or do you have to request an absentee ballot? And do you have to have a reason for doing that or not?
So forever you had to have a reason. You had to say, sign an oath that says I'm going to be out of the precinct that day, can't vote. But that was changed, I want to say 10 years ago. We've had several elections with no excuses absentee voting. So if you want to vote absentee, you can vote absentee. And we've also expanded our window. We're going to talk about that in a minute, I think. The window up to 46 days where this period goes on. So no, you can go online or go to your county and apply for an absentee ballot. And you fill out the form. You got to give your driver's license number or your social security card number so they can find you in their system, in the voter system, and make sure you're registered and you are who you are. Say you are. There's a signature you have to sign, and that's kind of matched. And then if that all matches out and it verifies that it's good, then the Secretary of State will send you a absentee ballot to vote once the window opens up here. September 20th, it opened up already. Now, there's something new in the law that just passed. I call it the lifetime absentee list. If you want, you can ask to be put on the lifetime absentee list. And you can just tell the Secretary of State or the county, Every time there's an election, I want an absentee ballot mailed to me. I'm going to vote
Right.
absentee every election. And I really have some fraud issues or concerns with ballots being mailed out to people for every election without them actually asking for it in that election period.
Right.
I think there's going to be a lot of ballots sitting in the mail just ready to be opened and signed and sent in.
And that's where you'll hear stories sometimes of people saying like, oh, I got this in the mail and this person's dead or whatever. You know, that could happen in theory because of that is what you're saying.
Right. You have to trust that if they die or they become inactive, they're no longer eligible to vote or inactive or they move, that those ballots are going to keep coming. And they're just going to be floating around in the mail.
Yeah.
The other thing they did that's really disturbing the law, this isn't on Simon, this is on the legislature. They just went back and picked a date and time, July of 2013, and said if you were an absentee voter back then, kind of a consistent absentee voter, we're going to start the absentee, the all-time list with all of you people. So they said instead of starting from scratch and having everybody for the first time, I want to be on the all-time list. And one, I want to be on the two,
Right.
They just said everybody that was already voting absentee, we're just going to assume you want to be on the all-time list and you're on the all-time list. So a whole bunch of people are on the all-time voter list if you've been voting absentee that have no idea that they are.
I didn't know that. That's crazy.
Yeah, that's a real flaw in the law.
Do you think
Flaw in the law.
perhaps,
We should use that in the future. That's a whole segment. And now it's time for Flaw in the Law.
do you think perhaps some people have concerns about the integrity of our elections because it's freaking confusing and it's unclear? I've never heard that before, and I work at a think tank where we talk about these kind of things constantly.
Yeah, we're doing this presentation. We can plug doing one in a couple hours actually in Vadnais Heights. So if you're seeing this somehow, you probably won't be. Never mind. You missed it. It's over. But St. Cloud for sure next week and Edina next week. Check our website at americanexperiment.org/events to find out about this. I walk through the entire election process and point out these new laws and point out these flaws in the new laws and kind of the red flags. And then we layer the polling on like we're doing now. So that presentation is going. It's very complicated. There's a whole series of things that have to happen when you vote in person. It's all different when you vote in mail.
Yeah.
There's all the kinds of these other issues. It's confusing. There's a movement to return to one-day elections where we all go vote in the same day. There's some merit to that.
Yeah. But I will say the presentation is very helpful because if you're someone who's concerned about fraud in our elections, like I am, you need to know what you're talking about. It's extremely confusing, and I think it's easy to get your attention diverted by what would they call it, like a red herring in a book. Things that seem like, at first they might be suspicious. You find out there's reasons or whatever, and then other areas where we might think we've done that forever. Well, how do we know there isn't fraud in that area? So anyway, getting informed, attending one of those presentations, I highly recommend. Let's go to this figure 5 here. Over a third of Minnesotans say the state's laws make it too easy to vote.
Yeah, we kind of asked what I call a Goldilocks question. Is voting too easy? Is voting too hard? Is voting just right? And 36% think it's too easy to vote in Minnesota. And I think that's just another indication of the lack of integrity, the concerns about fraud. It's too easy to vote. So just kind of another way to ask the same kind of question. This is where Minnesotans feel. And if I was Steve Simon, I would be trying to lower those numbers.
Yeah, and something I've noticed in particular this election cycle is that you've been able to vote for weeks now. In Minnesota, the time we have to vote, did you say it's 42 days of early voting?
46.
46? Okay, is that compared to other states? Is that a long time?
Longest
it's
in
the
country.
longest?
Tied with other states.
I guess that
But
makes me feel better.
we're
Seems
number
like it's been
one.
going on forever.
We're number one, tied for number one. Yeah, longest in the country.
Good grief. Okay. Now, this is, I guess, kind of a hopeful part of the poll, right? It's strong majorities of Minnesotans support common sense election reforms. Will you walk us through what you asked people about, what sort of reforms you polled people on and how they responded?
Well, I don't know what you're looking at. I can't see. But the first one, the main one is voter ID, photo ID. I mean, that's the one people are most knowledgeable of. And we're at 81% of Minnesotans support photo ID. That's up from 69% when we polled it a few years ago. You remember there was a constitutional amendment in 2012 to make photo ID the law of the land. You have to present a photo ID to vote. Many other states have this. It was kind of caught up in the marriage amendment that year, and vote no was the mantra, and so both amendments went down in flames. But at the beginning of the summer, it was 81% of Minnesotans supported photo ID, and it ended up failing. by a little bit. So I think that's support is very strong for that. It's a common sense thing. You see all these memes and things like, here's a list of things where I have to show my ID, and I'll go rent a library book, or get all these different things, and then vote. No, you're good. Go ahead, vote. You can vote. We don't need to see your ID. We trust you. So it's kind of it just makes a lot of sense, and we could talk about photo ID for a long time. Another big reform, probably the biggest reform we could do in Minnesota, is provisional ballots. We need to add provisional ballots to the law in Minnesota. And here's the biggest flaw. I'll just try to explain the biggest flaw in Minnesota's voting process. If you register in advance to vote, there is a whole series of checks and verifications that you're going to go through at the Secretary of State's office with the DMV. Like I said, they're going to find out, make sure who you are is who you are, and where you live is where you live. And if you have trouble, they're going to send you a card or call you and say, hey, we can't verify. You're going to get a chance to fix that. There's a really good, strong process in place to verify an election day registration
day, right?
for election day. But in Minnesota, you can register to vote on election day. So you can walk in and say, I'm not registered here. I'm not registered at all. I'd like to register to vote. So again, you got to prove who you are is who you are. You got to prove where you live is where you live. And here's where it starts to get weak. Okay, first of all,
prove.
Well, prove, right? So my photo ID is one way to prove that in the poll. Good. Where you live is where you live. Well, here's the electric bill. There's a series of 7 documents that you can show to prove where you live. But here's where we get off track in Minnesota. If you can't prove that where you live, you can get somebody to vouch for you. So it's like, oh, my neighbor, he sees me come and go every day. He's registered to vote in the precinct. He's going to vouch for me, and he can vouch for up to 8 people. Hey, all these people are my neighbors. They're all going to vote today. I vouch for them. He signs a little oath, says they're good. That's a little sketchy. Secondly, I lost my train of thought.
Well, that's how I think I originally registered to vote when I was 18. My mom, I think I had a driver's license, but my mom was like, let's see if they just let you, if I just tell them you live with us. Of course, yeah, I was fine. But, my mom just said, yeah, she lives with us. And that got me through the through the registration.
Yeah, and that all would be fine. And there's a lot of states that have registration on election day, but we're the only state that has voting to register. Well, there's 3 states. I'll get this right. There's 3 states that have same-day registration but without provisional balloting. Most states that have same-day registration have provisional balloting. This is what provisional balloting means. All right, your neighbor vouched for you, but we don't. We gotta do the verification like you do if you come in advance.
Right.
So we're gonna put your ballot aside as a provisional ballot. We're not gonna count it today. It's gonna be in this pile of provisional ballots, and we're gonna quickly in the next few days determine whether you actually are who you say you are and live where you say you live. And if we do, we're going to put you in the counted pile and you're going to get counted. Now, election could come and go. It could be a big margin victory. Your vote might not even matter. But in a close election, that provisional ballot pile is going to be very important. I've done a lot of recounts.
That's interesting then, though. Isn't your vote tied to who you are as a person? Isn't that part of what we're not supposed to do?
You won't be tied. You literally throw it in the pile. So it'll be a pile of anonymous votes.
But then how do they know if you get verified?
Oh, you're right. You'd have to know. Somebody would have to know. But again, it's in an envelope.
Okay.
You're asking technical questions here that I'm not quite sure. But I'm just like the absentee ballot comes in an envelope.
Yeah.
We don't know who you vote, but all the verification's done on the outside of the envelope, and then if that's all checks out,
then it gets pushed
ballots
through and
removed and sent through the machine and counted. Here's the problem in Minnesota is that's not in place. We do not have provisional balloting. We do not have photo ID. In Idaho, they don't have either of those things, but they take a photo of you, or maybe Vermont, I think it's Vermont. They take a Polaroid of you at the polls to help verify later. But the votes counted in Minnesota. So you register on election day, you get vouched for. And we didn't even get into this, but now we have this new illegal immigrants voting. It's coming.
That could be next.
So we're going to let you vote today. It's going in the pile, and then later we'll decide whether you're eligible or not. And if you're not eligible, well, don't do it again. That's the consequence. And but my last vote's counted, right? Yeah, your last vote's counted. You're good. You get a free one, but don't do it again. It's a huge vulnerability in the system.
I was just going to add, you asked about this, and nearly 6 in 10 Minnesotans do favor that provisional ballot system, including a majority of Democrats and Republicans both.
Yes.
Which is interesting. That seems like an obvious good reform.
That's the number one reform that we could get to tighten up Minnesota's system.
And I did want to finish with this this idea that Minnesotans are concerned about non-citizens being registered to vote, including Democrats, in particular because I think this is a there have been recent changes in this area, right? So in the past legislative session, we have been giving, photo IDs to illegal immigrants, right? And people have been concerned that in that case, you're being automatically registered to vote, things like that. So talk a little bit about the results of that poll, if you would, and then what merit they have.
Yeah, I mean, so just to start off, we just asked Minnesotans, we just checked in on whether you think it was a good idea to give illegal immigrants driver's licenses. That's already passed. It's the law of the land. We checked in, 58% disapprove. The public never wanted it to happen, and they did it anyway. So that's that. Then so you've got illegal immigrants, non-citizens getting Minnesota driver's licenses. There was a fight on the floor. Republicans on the floor said we should make it look different. We should give it a different color in the background. We should put can't be used for voting on it. Nope. All those amendments were shot down. The illegal driver's license looks exactly like yours and mine. And so if they walk into a poll and try to register to vote on election day, it's going to be very difficult, if not impossible, for an election worker to not do that.
It's interesting because if you're under 21, Bill might not know this because it's been a while, but you get this big little banner across your whole face. It's like under 21. It circles around your picture. So it seems like that would have been an easy thing to do.
But we're okay stigmatizing young people because they're young. We're not okay with stigmatizing immigrants that their licenses are different. We feelings,
right?
Stigma.
Feelings.
So that's why we didn't do that. So you take that reform, and then you take the new law that says everybody who goes in touches government in any way, mostly the driver's license bureau, but also if you get welfare, if you get in a state program, you're going to get automatically registered to vote. So again, you've got an immigrant going to the driver's license bureau, getting the driver's licenses, and then Steve Simon stood up in the legislature and said, "Don't worry, we're not going to accidentally put those people into the voter pile." Okay, I don't trust it. And sure enough, this summer, there's some anecdotal stories out there of people making calls, and we found non-citizens who were mailed absentee ballot applications in the mail by the county, and they're not eligible to vote. And they came forward because they know they're not eligible to vote, and they think this is a flaw in the system and should be fixed. RNC, the Republican National Committee, sent some letters to Steve Simon. He said it's DMV's fault. And then eventually they had to come out and say, well, you're right. We did a little audit and we kicked out 1,000. We kicked out 1%. They used the word 1%. It's nothing. It's just 1%. But 1% of 100,000 is 1,000 votes. They've already, this is a month ago now, already kicked out, invalidated 1,000 votes that should not have been sent over to the Secretary of State's in this process. And of course, we asked Minnesotans, do you trust this new process? 66% said no, we don't trust. The automatic voter registration and the immigrant driver's licenses are going to prevent people from voting who have no right to vote in Minnesota. So I weren't surprised by that number.
Wow. Yeah, I will say I've moved around a little bit in the past since I've been eligible to vote. And every time I think they've figured out before I went in and updated my voter registration that I'd moved. I'm guessing it's the DMV, but there's a lot of systems in place that seem to do things automatically. And I doubt personally that they would detect whether or not you were a valid voter.
And what Steve Simon says in the committee hearings when he was testifying on this is that a non-citizen, an illegal immigrant, will not go vote because that's a violation of federal law. And they can't risk their immigration status by breaking the law, and they won't do it. And I think, well, wait a minute. They've already broken the law by coming here illegally. And we're going to rely on they won't break the law because it's against the law. Well, then why? It's shocking.
No one's going to kill anyone. That's terrible.
That we have crime in the city.
Why would anyone kill anyone?
So, and then he says, because they would fear being deported. Well, when's the last time anybody in Minnesota was deported? I don't think it's happening. This administration, the Biden administration, is not deporting anybody, and certainly not in Minnesota. So we don't cooperate with ICE. I mean, it's nonsense. And these safeguards aren't in place, and it's raising concerns.
Well, Bill, did I miss anything key from your polling here, or did we hit all the main points?
We hit the high points.
Wonderful. So if people still have questions, if they want to learn more, what do they do?
AmericanExperiment.org/events, or just AmericanExperiment.org. Or they should subscribe to Thinking Minnesota Magazine, because you've been looking at the latest copy of Thinking Minnesota Magazine, where our polling, our scientific polling, our accurate scientific issues-based polling is in
Trust
every
the experts, everybody.
issue.
Thank you for listening to the American Experiment Podcast.